Though usually defined as a threat to our education systems, generative artificial intelligence can serve as a tool for developing certain activities in the Spanish as a foreign language classroom. Since its origins in the 15th century, teaching Spanish to non-native speakers has experienced a period of great development, especially from the institutional effort of Instituto Cervantes. This expansion and methodological innovation context adds up to the recent technological advances of generative AI, a revolution that entails specific problems such as copyright conflicts or plagiarism. However, the constant growing in the use of this technology and its democratization suggests that we should get used to its presence in society and, therefore, in our classrooms. Good morning, my name is Antonio Castro Balbuena, and my conference, as you may know, will be dedicated to propose an activity that merges narratology and generative artificial intelligence to develop linguistic, literary, and narrative competencies of secondary and university education students enrolled in SFL courses. Additionally, other objectives will be pursued, such as the use of artificial intelligence in education and the integration of literary theory concepts into the learning process of the students. For this whole purpose, I will proceed as follows. First, I will illustrate the situation of generative artificial intelligence and its link with narrative. Secondly, I will continue with a state-of-the-art review on the use of literature and the narrative in the SFL classroom. After that, I will propose an activity suitable for intermediate levels of linguistic competence in Spanish, typical of secondary education and university. Lastly, I will sum up some of the more relevant ideas in a final section. Let's begin, then, with the section dedicated to generative AI and narrative. Generative artificial intelligence, based on large language models, has the goal to imitating human behavior. Due to its potential, this technology is currently a topic of discussion in a variety of fields, such as education, where it is being analyzed whether this technological innovation really provides a solution to educational challenges. Nevertheless, we should keep in mind that these systems not only imitate human behavior, but also outperform humans in many of their tasks. Processing a literary or narrative text, however, requires much more than excellent synthesizing and memorizing capabilities, since literature contains emotions. In fact, narration is emotion in itself, either because of its argument and characters, or because of its own narrative structures. This is because emotion is another area in which artificial intelligence must be trained, at least in its recognition or imitation. Emotions are not the only human aspect replicated by generative artificial intelligence. Its creative process is, or aims to be, a reflection of human creativity, which has been called computational creativity, a process that implies the generation of new material from a specific database. Apart from this computational creativity, texts generated by these systems are received by a reader, whose role goes beyond that of a traditional receiver, with associated revision and creation tasks. All of this, as we will see shortly, can also be exploited in the SFL classroom. The best example to illustrate the link between narrative and artificial intelligence is the system devised by Pablo Hervás in 2016, called ProperWriter. This system used a specific database to generate the narrative structure of a story, which then had to be created by a human. This shows the use of technology as a creative assistant, a more ethical and suitable approach in line with certain definitions of artificial intelligence as a tool, instead as a substitute. As you can see in the present slide, some published literary works reflect this behavior, as they explicitly state both human and artificial authorship. Let's continue now with the state-of-the-art review on the use of literature and narrative in the SFL classroom. In its latest version, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages states that reading comprehension depends on the text type and reading purpose. What is more interesting is the treatment of reading as a leisure activity, where narrative appears as early as A1 level, as you can see in the present slide. At that moment, illustrations can be used as a visual support to understand the story, while higher proficiency levels entail the understanding of more complex narrations. Narrative thus appears to be a suitable resource for accessing a language from the earliest levels of linguistic competence. One of the skills needed to fully comprehend these text types is narrative competence, which is considered fundamental for developing such communicative skills, as it allows us to learn the language in specific conditions of coherence, cohesion, and adequacy, that is, in the special use of narrative texts. As a consequence, studying them through narratology, a relevant field of literary theory, provides a complete interdisciplinary and complex learning process, in which speakers not only acquire the language, but also the culture from which it emanates. Although scarce, among the precedents for the use of narratology in the SFL classroom is the proposal of Del Valle Revuelta. In her study of narrative literary text in the Spanish language classroom, she suggests using a specific concept, narrative space, which allows students to establish links between the story and the Spanish language. Another case of using specific narratives in the SFL classroom is that devised by Fritzler, who proposes the use of transmedia narrative to achieve student implication, among other benefits. As a material that is accessible even at the early levels of linguistic competence, narrative can be an ideal mechanism for introducing literature in the SFL classroom. Among the advantages of using literary materials in this context, it is worth mentioning the improvement of communicative skills or the ability of literary texts to personally engage learners through empathy. Literature is thus configured as a rich material which allows access to a specific use of the target language, but also to other cultural and interdisciplinary values that enhance linguistic learning. In conclusion, the narrative and the literary text is a suitable material for the SFL classroom due to its numerous advantages, although its features and the learning context require a specific design of the related activities. For taking advantage of its benefits, narrative text can be used as a bridge between the literary and the purely linguistic or functional, where narratological concepts play an essential role. Now let's proceed with the proposed activity. The activity has been designed to be customizable by each teacher according to their specific goals. Through the objectives presented in this slide, this activity aims to develop students' main communicative skills in Spanish and to provide digital education, combining narratological concepts and an ethical use of generative AI, as well as to encourage thinking about the value of art and literature in the present days. As you can see, the proposed activity is divided into 3 sections. Each of them proposes different actions to develop the main communicative skills of reception, production, interaction, and mediation. Although this activity could be performed independently, it is framed here within a particular context, with preliminary and follow-up stages, in which narrative and artificial intelligence are presented as the main content for the teaching of Spanish. Next, I will present the main activity. Later, I will briefly explain the nature and the purpose of both preliminary and follow-up stages. The main activity consists of reading AI-assisted rewriting and analyzing a specific Spanish literary text. For this purpose, it has the following implementation phases. The purpose of activity design phase is to include the students in the teaching and learning process in order to position them as active participants in their own learning. In this stage, students are presented with a series of categories. From these, they will have to choose a specific option of each category, as presented in the slide. In this way, the student decides on the text to work with, as well as the two narrative changes that their new version, Impurity, a fanfiction, will contain. Both narrative changes are based on specific narratological concepts. In the first case, the character, narrator, or point of view, as well as time. And in the second case, narrative genre is modified. The linguistic choices will vary in each case. For example, the first narrative change will depend on significant changes in verb tense, vocabulary, or tone, while the second one will involucrate the manner in which students elaborate their texts. The first reading phase will be individual. In the text, certain linguistic structures and vocabulary will be highlighted, which can be studied in the classroom or proposed as an autonomous identification task, depending on the general linguistic proficiency of the students. In the same way, the text could be accompanied by a brief self-assessment exercise for the student's comprehension. In the prompt design phase, the student must prepare the instructions for the AI to generate a derived version of the main story. This phase requires writing a brief text in Spanish based on predefined ideas, which emerge not only from the rules of the first phase, but also from the students' own creativity in how to apply them. The students will have to proceed following two stages. First is creation in L1, and then its translation to L2. For a successful completion of this activity, the teacher may include additional guidelines, especially to ensure the wording of the prompt is clear, concise, and specific. The generation and revision of the text phase entails the use of generative AI in the activity. Each student will insert the previously designed prompt into the generative AI program, and from this moment on, the student will supervise the text generation. Thus, the first step will be to check that the narrative changes are correctly applied to the generated text. The responsibility for the text alignment with the proposed narrative changes lies with the student, not with the generative AI. This supervision will entail two main tasks. First, the student must find the equivalents of the highlighted vocabulary from the original text in the new text, synonyms, similar expressions, and so on. And second, the students have to write a brief analysis in Spanish to justify how the narrative changes were implemented. The analysis can include a reflection on the creative decisions of the AI and its adequate or inadequate correspondence with the narrative changes proposed in the activity. And now let's delve into the preliminary and follow-up activities. In this case, two brief preliminary exercises are proposed. The first one is not explicitly performed in the classroom. It consists of adapting the main activity to other Spanish literary texts that had been previously used in the course. The aim is to place the text in a particular context, which the students must understand when receiving the materials of the main activity. The second of these preliminary exercises is a lecture by the teacher divided in two parts, in which they present the nature of the activity, narrative and the use of artificial intelligence as a tool. During this explanation, students listen to the teacher speaking Spanish, take notes of vocabulary selected, and ask questions if necessary. On the other hand, the follow-up activities aim to develop students' oral production skills by fostering the thought on the connection between narrative and artificial intelligence, as well as enhancing creative writing, imagination, and critical thinking. First, we have a debate activity, which consists in discussing ideas about the artistic and literary value of human and artificial creation. And second, the last follow-up activity intends to enhance writing competence through creativity. For this purpose, the students are presented the possibility to undertake creative writing, again based on an initial text, but as you are seeing on the slide, with rules that are more flexible and more suitable for each student to progress according to their own abilities and language proficiency. In this activity, the initial text is a key element as a starting point. For the selection of this text, factors such as those outlined by Del Valle Revuelta may be useful. She recommends evaluating its accessibility, that is, the text has to be suitable for our students' language proficiency level. Its relevance, meaning that the text should be compatible with the students' interests and preferences. Its profitability, which means the text is rich enough to design specific activities, and its cultural significance, in other words, the text and cultural links. Furthermore, we must also consider other factors, such as its length and multimodality. Lastly, lacking a more detailed development because of time limits, the assessment of the main proposed activity should contain the following indicators. A formal assessment of the reading linguistic competence. B. Factors specific to creative writing assessment that could be useful to avoid a single final score. And C. The correct use of artificial intelligence, based on its use as a tool and not as a substitute. Finally, let's sum up some of the most relevant conclusions of the conference. Based on the previous discussion, this theoretical model of activity that combines narratology and generative AI is proven to be appropriate for the SFL classroom. Among its essential features, we can highlight the use of narratological concepts, because it allows students to delve into a text reading regardless of the language. Its main goal, learning Spanish, also allows learners to achieve other objectives, such as thinking on the value of art and literature at a time when both are being challenged. Another remarkable feature is the possibility of advancing digital literacy, especially AI literacy. We need to understand how this technology works, but also how to use it ethically without losing its potential benefits. Its open and systematic nature makes it a customizable activity that can be adjusted to different goals, and modularity that allows for the implementation of other methodologies. However, despite its relevance, it is mandatory to progress in the development of this activity, this time through a real experience in the classroom. In conclusion, given all these possibilities, this activity that combines narratology and artificial intelligence will allow us to achieve its goals, such as learning Spanish through a specific and artistic use, enhancing the learner's digital literacy, and promoting their critical thinking even in a foreign language and culture. That's all. Thank you so much for your attention, especially for organizing this congress dedicated to innovative and inclusive teaching. See you soon.